I came for a massage because my back hurt. I left with a heart that allowed itself to be alive for the first time. And all this thanks to a person who simply listened without judgment. They say if you stare at the ceiling long enough, the cracks start to look like road maps of all the things you never did. Jake knew that too well. At 5:47 a.m., the alarm hadn't rung yet, but his body had. No chime needed. Years of routine had carved it into muscle memory. Wake up before the world does. Start moving before the brain catches up. He sat on the edge of the bed in silence. The room dim. The sky outside a dull gray canvas. His wife was still asleep, her breath steady and slow. 12 years of marriage. No major fights. No screaming. But also, no late-night laughter, no unexpected kisses, no warmth in the silence. Somewhere along the line, love had turned into a habit they both performed, like folding laundry. Jake made coffee the same way he did every day. Same brand, same mug, same 2 sugars. The comforting loop of morning rituals. But as he leaned against the counter, steam rising in front of his face, he felt it. That quiet ache. The one you can't name, only notice when nothing else is loud enough to drown it out. He taught English at the local high school. Reliable, competent kind. His students liked him. His colleagues respected him. He stayed late for struggling kids. He remembered birthdays. He stocked snacks in his drawer for anyone who needed one. Mr. Carson is solid, they all said. A compliment. A cage. On his birthday, his wife gave him a card and a gift certificate. 5 massage sessions, she said, kissing his cheek. You need to take care of yourself more. He smiled, said thank you. And then the card sat on the dresser for a week, unopened. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate it. He just didn't know how to accept care anymore. It had been years since someone looked at him and thought, maybe he's the one who needs help. One Saturday morning, he finally drove to the clinic. Parked, turned off the engine, and sat. The building was modern, inviting. Inside, probably warm lighting and soft music. Still, he couldn't make himself go in. 20 minutes passed before he started the car again and drove home. I mixed up the time, he told his wife. She didn't question it. The following Monday, he rebooked. This time he went in. The receptionist greeted him kindly. She handed him a form and a pen. One question stuck out. Are you comfortable with physical touch? He hesitated, then checked yes. It wasn't true, but he wanted it to be. Alex will be with you shortly, she said. Jake expected someone older, calm and clinical, but Alex looked barely 30, if that. No small talk, no performance. Just quiet, professional presence. His voice steady, his movements grounded. Any injuries? He asked. Just tension, Jake replied. Back mostly. Alex nodded. We'll take care of that. Jake laid down on the table. The sheet was warm. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus. And when Alex began, Jake realized something. It had been years since anyone touched him with purpose. The massage wasn't rushed or formulaic. It felt deliberate, thoughtful, the kind of attention that says, I see this pain, and I'm going to meet it where it lives. Jake found himself exhaling. Not dramatically, just a slow release he didn't realize he'd been holding. Halfway through, Alex spoke. You hold tension like someone afraid to say something. Jake didn't respond, but the words stayed. That night, he replayed them over and over, sitting on the couch in the dark. He came back the next week. Alex didn't ask why Jake had returned, didn't push conversation, but somehow the silence between them felt less like emptiness and more like space, like a room waiting to be filled. Rough week, Alex asked during the second session. Jake let out a low laugh. They're all kind of the same. Monotony's its own kind of weight, Alex said. Jake didn't say anything, but something in his chest shifted. Each session peeled back a layer. Not of clothing, of silence. Jake found himself speaking. Nothing dramatic. Just fragments about his job, about his students, about the way he missed being excited to wake up. One session, he said, I don't remember the last time I felt anything besides tired. Alex didn't respond. Just pressed into the muscle below Jake's shoulder blade and let the truth hang there, like mist in morning air. By the third session, Jake was watching the clock at school, not counting down to the weekend, but to that hour, that space. That permission to exist without speaking, fixing, helping. He started remembering things. Not big events. Small flickers. A college friend whose smile lingered longer than expected. A gym teacher's hand resting on his back. Feelings he had filed away under confusion, then buried under obligation. He wasn't thinking about labels. Wasn't thinking about men or women. Just about why his chest tightened every time he felt seen. Session 4 fell on a Thursday. Alex asked no questions. He just listened with his hands. And that was enough. Jake went home that night and sat in the car for 45 minutes before going inside. He didn't want to break the quiet that session gave him. Didn't want to put the mask back on. His wife was watching TV. She looked up, smiled, then turned back to the screen. Jake showered, dressed in old sweatpants, and sat beside her. She placed her hand over his. It was kind, familiar, but felt like holding hands with a memory. "You're quieter lately," she said. "I don't feel like I have much to say. You seem different. Is something wrong?" Jake shook his head. "No, just tired." She nodded, and the room fell silent again. Only this time, it wasn't restful. The final session was on a rainy Tuesday. The kind of day where everything feels distant. Alex worked methodically. Shoulders, spine, lower back. "You're carrying more today," he said softly. Jake nodded. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how long I've been performing. How long I've lived a version of myself I thought was expected." Alex didn't answer, just adjusted the pressure. Jake exhaled. "That's not sustainable," Alex finally said. Jake's throat tightened. "I know." After the session, Jake didn't move right away. He stayed lying down, staring at the floor, blinking slowly. Alex waited. "You can take your time," he said. Jake got dressed in silence. At the door, he turned. "Thank you," he said. Alex nodded. "Be kind to yourself." Jake stepped into the rain without his umbrella. Let it soak his shirt, his hair, his skin. It felt like the first real thing in months. That night, he looked in a mirror for a long time. Not to check his reflection, but to face it. "I'm not okay," he whispered. "And I think I've never really been." It wasn't shame. It wasn't regret. It was the beginning of truth. And truth, even when quiet, is never small. Jake didn't know what he expected when he walked into the clinic again, but it wasn't this. It wasn't the quiet confidence that settled into his shoulders the moment he heard his own name spoken gently. "Jake," Alex said, with the same calm tone he remembered from before. Jake stood, nodded, and followed him into the room without hesitation this time. There was no small talk, and somehow that felt more intimate than any pleasantry ever could. Jake didn't need filler words anymore. He needed space, and Alex gave it to him. Once inside, Jake slipped out his jacket, laid it neatly on the chair, and stepped toward the table. He didn't glance at the decor, didn't scan the room for distractions. He was focused, grounded, more aware of his own presence than he'd been in a long time. Alex waited patiently as Jake laid down on the table. No rush, no pushing, just enough silence to let the noise in Jake's head settle. Alex began at the shoulders, moving deliberately. Jake could tell immediately this wasn't just muscle work. It was attention, listening through the skin, and something about that began to peel away a layer of weight Jake didn't realize he was carrying. "I'm going to keep the pressure medium unless you want more," Alex said. "No, that's fine," Jake answered, his voice quieter than he expected. Alex's hands moved with consistency, never abrupt, never searching for reaction. He wasn't trying to impress. He was simply there, present, focused on one task, easing what hurt. As the massage continued, Jake's mind wandered. Not chaotically, not the spiraling kind of thinking he was used to. This was different, reflective, clear. "Rough week?" Alex asked eventually, the question dropping lightly into the room like a leaf, not a rock. Jake let out a breath. "Not worse than usual. I think I'm just noticing it more now." "That happens," Alex said. "Once you stop ignoring the tension, it feels louder." "Yeah," Jake muttered. "That's exactly it." They didn't speak for another 20 minutes. And in that silence, Jake felt his thoughts shifting in unexpected directions. He began wondering when exactly he'd started equating numbness with strength. When had disconnection become his survival strategy? After the session ended, Jake sat up slowly. He didn't feel like rushing to leave. There was a strange comfort in lingering. Alex folded a corner of the sheet, stood a few feet back, giving Jake the space to move at his own pace. "Thanks," Jake said as he tied his shoes. Alex nodded. "You're holding a lot, but you're letting go faster than last time." Jake looked up. "Is that a good thing?" "It's an honest thing," Alex replied. Jake left the clinic with his shoulders a few degrees lower. On the way home, he didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need noise. For once, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. By the third session, the air between them had become something quiet but charged, safe, not sterile. Jake walked in and greeted Alex with a nod. That was all it took. They didn't rehearse roles. Jake wasn't a teacher here. He wasn't a husband. He wasn't anything except someone who wanted to stop pretending he was fine. Alex started with the lower back this time, working upward slowly. "You got a lot of rigidity in the lumbar spine," he said softly. "That's usually connected to fear of change or instability." Jake chuckled once under his breath. "I guess that tracks. You don't have to explain it," Alex said gently. "It just helps to know the body remembers, even when we don't." Jake closed his eyes. He wasn't crying, but he was close. Not from sadness, from relief. For once, he didn't have to be in control. Near the end of that session, Jake found himself speaking without quite meaning to. "I used to think that if I kept everything under control, things would just stay okay." Alex didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was even. "Did they?" Jake opened his eyes. "No." Alex placed one hand firmly between Jake's shoulder blades, grounding him like an anchor. Sometimes control is just a way of managing fear. Jake nodded, and in that moment, it didn't feel like therapy or judgment or advice. It felt like witnessing. Pure, quiet witnessing. By the fourth session, something had shifted in Jake that even he couldn't ignore. It wasn't attraction, not in the way people think of it. It was recognition, being seen, heard, felt, and not in the skin, but in the space around it. He found himself walking into the clinic not because he needed a massage, but because he needed to remember what it felt like to be treated like a whole person. He lay down before Alex had to ask. His body settled into the table easily, as if this hour was the only time he allowed gravity to do its job. Alex didn't ask questions this time. His hands simply moved, adjusted, followed patterns they both had begun to understand without speaking. Jake found his voice again halfway through. "Do you like this job?" he asked. Alex didn't stop working. "I like what it gives people. Stillness. Relief. Sometimes clarity." Jake exhaled. "That's what it's been for me." "That's what it should be," Alex said. "It's not about fixing someone. It's about reminding them they don't have to carry everything alone." The words hit deeper than Jake expected. They weren't revolutionary, but they were rare. Later that evening, Jake sat in the car in the clinic parking lot for nearly an hour. He didn't feel the need to rush home. He scrolled through his phone, not looking for anything in particular, then turned the screen off and let his head fall back against the seat. He thought about the last time someone had asked him what he needed. Not what he could do or what he should be, but what he needed. He couldn't remember. On the fifth session, Jake didn't speak until the end. Alex had worked through the session in silence, moving slowly over muscles that had begun to release more easily. Jake's breath was steady, his thoughts quieter. But at the end, as he sat up, something caught in his chest. He looked at Alex, who stood near the table folding the towels. "Do you ever get tired?" Jake asked, "of holding space for other people?" Alex looked up. There was a pause. "Yes," he said honestly, "but it's worth it. People carry so much and have so few places to put it." Jake swallowed. "I think I've forgotten how to be honest. Not just with others, with myself." Alex didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Jake left that day with something new. Not resolution, not clarity, just awareness. A widening. The kind that doesn't answer questions, but finally allows them to be asked. At home, he didn't speak much. His wife noticed, but she didn't pry. She watched him gently, like she knew something was changing, but wasn't sure what. Jake looked at her across the room. For the first time in years, he felt something different. Not guilt, not shame, but distance. A kind of soft, inevitable drifting. That night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The cracks were still there. the ones he used to trace in his mind. But now, they looked less like roads leading nowhere and more like maps waiting to be followed. And maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to walk one. Jake had always believed silence was safer than honesty. Not because he didn't want to speak, but because for most of his life, he believed that the truth would cost him everything. Not just comfort, not just acceptance, but his entire identity as he had constructed it. A husband, a teacher, a stable, reliable man. There was no space in that narrative for confusion, for softness, for the parts of him he never explored beyond a fleeting glance in a mirror he didn't like to look into. It was somewhere around the seventh session when things started to shift, not on the surface. Outwardly, nothing was different. He arrived. He lay down. Alex worked. The pressure was the same, the rhythm the same, but something underneath had loosened, not a muscle but a guard. Jake had learned over the years how to redirect emotion. When something pressed too close, he'd make a joke, change the subject, offer help instead of accepting it. It worked. It had always worked. But in that room with Alex's hands pressing gently into the back of his ribcage, he didn't have an escape hatch. He didn't need one. And that made him afraid in a way he hadn't been since he was a teenager. "Tell me if anything feels off," Alex said, as he adjusted Jake's arm slightly. "It's fine," Jake replied. A beat of silence passed. Then he spoke again. "Do you ever have a feeling that keeps trying to surface, but every time it gets close, you push it back down so hard that you forget it ever existed?" Alex didn't respond right away. His hands didn't stop. "I think everyone does," he said eventually. "But most people just get better at ignoring it." Jake's mouth opened, but no words came. He felt them in his chest, trying to form, like a wave about to break. He almost let it go, almost swallowed it again. But this time he didn't. "When I was 17, he said quietly, I was in love with a boy." Alex didn't flinch. Jake kept going, barely above a whisper. "We were on the swim team. He never knew. I didn't even admit it to myself. But it was real, and I hated myself for it." The silence that followed didn't feel like judgment. It felt like breathing room. "I buried it," Jake continued. "Went to college, dated girls, met my wife. I told myself that part of me didn't exist. That was a phase or confusion or whatever made it easier to move forward." Alex's hands moved with the same steadiness, no change in rhythm. "But never left," Jake said. "It just got quieter until I stopped hearing it. And now?" Alex asked, voice steady. Jake exhaled slowly. "Now I hear it every time I walk into this room." He didn't cry, but his throat tightened so much it felt like his body was doing it for him. His skin tingled from being exposed, but not in a physical way. In the way you feel when someone hears what you never said out loud before. "You don't need to apologize for anything you feel," Alex said. "I know," Jake replied, "but I've spent so long pretending I didn't feel anything at all." Alex stepped back for a moment, letting the silence hold. "We all deserve the truth about ourselves," he said. Jake nodded, unable to speak for a moment. That night, he drove home in near darkness. He didn't turn on the lights in the car, didn't play music. He sat in the driveway with the engine off, fingers gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor him in place. He wasn't afraid of what he had said. He was afraid of what it meant, because saying it out loud had made it real again. Inside the house, everything looked the same. His wife sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled. He smiled back. It was muscle memory. It had nothing to do with how he felt. "You're home late," she said. "Traffic," he replied. He sat across from her, watching the way the light reflected in her eyes, the familiarity of her posture. They had built a life together, and somewhere deep down, he knew he still loved her. But it wasn't the kind of love he could grow inside anymore. It was the kind you protect because it once mattered and because letting go of it felt like betrayal, even if staying with it was something else entirely. She reached for his hand, squeezed it gently. "You okay?" "I'm just tired," he answered. She nodded. "I know the feeling." The next session, Jake didn't lie down right away. He stood near the table, fidgeting with his watch band. "Is it okay if I talk first?" he asked. "Of course," Alex said, setting the folded towel on the stool beside him. Jake swallowed hard. "I think I've been living someone else's life." Alex tilted his head, but didn't speak. I made every decision to avoid the one truth that terrified me most. I thought if I built the perfect exterior, good job, nice home, stable marriage, then the inside would eventually match. But it never did. Alex listened, arms relaxed at his sides. I don't think I'm straight, Jake said, voice breaking slightly. And I don't think I ever was. Saying it wasn't the hard part. The hard part was not turning away after it left his mouth. Alex took a breath. I appreciate you trusting me with that. I'm scared, Jake admitted. Not just of what it means, but of everything I've already built. Alex nodded slowly. It's okay to be scared. It doesn't mean you're wrong. Jake finally laid down on the table. When Alex placed his hands on Jake's shoulders, it wasn't just touch. It was acknowledgement. It was grounding. And in that moment, Jake realized that nothing about him had changed, except the part he'd always tried to hide had finally been seen. The next few sessions weren't as heavy. Or maybe they were, but they didn't feel like weights anymore. Jake spoke more easily, about moments from his past, about the teacher in high school who smiled at him a little too kindly, about the roommate in college who always stood a little too close, about how he dismissed those memories as harmless because anything else was too dangerous to consider. He told Alex about how much energy it took to be silent for so long. Most days, he said, I wasn't even pretending anymore. I convinced myself it was true. That's how denial works, Alex replied. It doesn't erase the truth. It just dulls it enough to live with. Jake nodded. Until one day you can't. Each conversation was like air returning to lungs he forgot he had. Not because Alex gave advice or direction, but because he stayed. Fully, honestly, without flinching. You don't fix people, Jake said once. You just hold them long enough for them to feel whole again. I think people fix themselves, Alex replied. But most need a place where that's allowed. Jake's home life grew quieter. He didn't speak more or less with his wife, but the space between them widened. Not in cruelty, in clarity. One evening, she looked up from her book and said, You're somewhere else lately. I know, Jake said. She waited, then asked, Is there something you want to say? Jake took a long breath. I think I need to talk to someone. About things I've buried. She looked at him, really looked. I've always wanted you to be okay, she said. I'm not sure I ever was, he answered. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for answers. But that night, she slept on the far edge of the bed, and he didn't move to close the distance. He wasn't ready to speak all of it yet, but he knew the words were there now, waiting for someone who would hear them without turning away. Jake had spent most of his life preparing for a conversation he never imagined actually having. He played the scenario over in his mind hundreds of times, sometimes in whispers while driving alone, sometimes in the quiet space between finishing dinner and loading the dishwasher. But it always stopped short, always ended in silence. Until now. It happened on a Thursday evening. Nothing unusual about the day. He had worked, driven home, taken a shower. The house was quiet, and the weight of routine hung like it always did. But something inside him no longer wanted to carry it. He walked into the bathroom, looked into the mirror, and for the first time in his life, really looked. He saw a man who had done his best to build something good. A career, a marriage, a reputation, and none of it had been fake. But it had never been whole, either. It had been constructed around absence, around suppression, around fear. He stared at himself and felt a tremble begin at the edges of his body. He wasn't scared of who he saw. He was scared of what it would cost to tell the truth about him. Then he said it aloud. I'm gay. He blinked at his reflection. I'm gay. The words didn't break him. They didn't shatter glass or summon lightning. They simply were. And for the first time, that was enough. He stood there for another few seconds, then added, quietly, steadily, I'm not bad. I'm not broken. I'm me. He didn't cry, but something inside him softened so deeply that it felt like breathing for the first time. Not shallow, not managed. Real breath, real air. He stayed in that space for a long time before stepping out into the hallway. He walked to the bedroom. His wife was reading, her glasses resting on the bridge of her nose, one hand curled under the book. Can we talk? He asked. She looked up, immediately sensing the shift. Her eyes held curiosity, but not suspicion. She closed the book, placed it beside her, and nodded. Jake sat at the edge of the bed. He didn't fidget. He didn't prepare a speech. He simply began. I need to say something. And I need you to know first, it's not about blame. It's not about regret. It's about honesty. The kind I've never let myself have. Until now. She said nothing, her gaze steady. I'm gay, he said. The words hung in the room, unhurried. They didn't fall with weight. They stood with quiet truth. I didn't choose to lie, he continued. But I did. To myself. To you. To everyone. Because I thought I had to. Because I thought it was the only way to be safe. The only way to be loved. She stayed silent, but not coldly. Her expression shifted, soft, complicated, deeply human. I loved you, he said. I still do. Just not in the way I thought I could. A tear welled in her eye, and she blinked it away. I always wondered, she whispered. There were moments I saw something, but I told myself I was imagining it. Jake reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. I never wanted to hurt you, he said. You haven't, she replied. Not by being honest. They sat in that space, hands resting gently between them, the sound of the world quieting around their shared breath. I don't want to lose what we have, Jake said, even if it has to become something else. She nodded. We can choose what it becomes. And then, as if by instinct, they leaned forward, not in passion, but in grief and love and release. Their foreheads touched, and they wept. Not for betrayal, not for loss, but for all the years they had tried so hard to make something work without knowing what was missing. They cried until the shaking stopped. They cried until there was nothing left but breath. Afterward, they lay side by side on the bed, eyes open to the ceiling. The cracks Jake once saw as failures now felt like roads leading forward, not backward. I want you to be free, she said. I want you to be happy, he replied. Silence followed, but it was no longer the silence of avoidance. It was a pause of rebuilding, reimagining. That night, Jake slept in the guest room, not out of anger, not because they couldn't share space, but because they had agreed some space was needed for truth to settle. He lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, and realized something remarkable. He didn't feel guilt. He didn't feel shame. He felt clarity, and that was more than he ever thought possible. Over the next few days, things unfolded slowly. They spoke every night, not about logistics, not about separation or timelines, but about memories, about moments that mattered, about gratitude. One evening, she said, "You taught me what patience looks like, and you taught me how to build a life from kindness," Jake replied. Neither of them tried to rewrite the past. There was no use in that. The years they had shared were real, imperfect, but full of effort, full of the kind of love that transcends categories. Eventually, they began talking about what came next. Not a dramatic divorce, not an erasure, but a shift. Jake found a small apartment a few blocks from school. He packed slowly, carefully, leaving behind what no longer fit and carrying only what felt honest. She helped him fold shirts into boxes. They laughed once, and an old mug neither of them wanted to keep. It was the kind of laughter that hurt a little but not too much. When the day came for Jake to leave, she stood at the door with him, holding his hand. "You'll always be part of my story," she said. "And you'll always be the person who made me feel safe enough to find myself," Jake replied. They embraced. A long, firm hug that held no bitterness. He walked down the steps, got into the car, and drove. Not away, just forward. At a stoplight, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. He didn't look different, but he looked back, and for the first time, he didn't look away. Jake moved into the apartment in early spring. He didn't make a ceremony out of it. No housewarming, no dramatic closure. Just a few boxes, a borrowed truck, and a quiet afternoon of unpacking. He brought only what he needed. A few books, his favorite mug, a photograph from the coast. The rest, he left behind, not because it didn't matter, but because it had served its time. His new place was modest and clean, not filled with meaning yet, but not empty either. It was space, honest space, a place without pretense, where he could let the silence in without fear, where every object had been chosen, not inherited. He kept teaching. That didn't change. He walked the same hallways, gave the same lessons. But something in the way he stood had shifted. His students noticed. Some said he smiled more. Others couldn't quite name it, but they could feel it. He wasn't hiding in plain sight anymore. He still kept granola bars in the drawer. Still stayed after class when someone needed to talk. Still remembered birthdays. But he didn't perform now. He just showed up. Fully. His relationship with his ex-wife became something new. Not broken. Not strained. Just different. They texted. Shared holiday plans. Sometimes they met for coffee on Sundays. Not to revisit what had been, but to update each other on what was. It wasn't sad. It was a quiet friendship built from respect and real care. They both understood that love had never left. It had only changed shape. As for Alex, they kept seeing each other once every other week for massage appointments. Jake no longer needed them for pain, but he kept going because it felt like a way of checking in with himself as much as with Alex. One Thursday after a session, Alex asked, "Want to grab coffee?" Jake didn't hesitate. Sure. They walked down the block to a quiet cafe. Sat by the window. No agenda. No meaning loaded into the moment. Just coffee. A conversation. Presence. They talked about the weather. About books. About how strange it is to unlearn a version of yourself. Jake didn't try to define what was happening between them. Neither did Alex. There was no pressure. No script. After that, coffee became a habit. Not every time, but often enough. Sometimes they talked about nothing. Sometimes about everything. One afternoon, Jake shared something he hadn't said aloud yet. "I used to think acceptance was something people gave you," he said. "But I'm learning it's something you give yourself first." Alex nodded. "And once you do, the rest starts making sense." It wasn't romantic. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was real. And Jake had stopped trying to label real things. He started journaling again. Not every day, just when the thoughts needed room. He didn't write to understand himself. He wrote because he finally felt like someone worth listening to, even if that someone was just him. Months passed, slowly, calmly, and Jake began to feel what he hadn't in years: balance. He went for walks in the evening, cooked for himself, read in silence. Sometimes he missed the noise of the life he used to have, the shared meals, the certainty of ritual, but he didn't miss the pretending. He didn't date. Not yet. Not because he was afraid, but because he was healing. Fully. On his own terms. One night, while drinking tea on his balcony, he realized something. He wasn't waiting for life to start anymore. He was living it. When he saw Alex next, they didn't speak about anything deep. Just a few jokes. A book recommendation. Talk of an upcoming storm. But when they stood outside the clinic, saying goodbye, Jake paused. "You've been a safe place for me," he said. Alex looked at him, no surprise in his eyes. "You've always had that in you," he replied. "I just reminded you." Jake smiled, a quiet one, and left without needing anything more. That evening, he stood again in front of a mirror. Not to confess, not to question, just to witness. He looked at his own reflection and nodded once, then turned off the light and went to sleep. Peacefully,